Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist oppression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. It is your local community radio station. My name's Andy and I will be here for the next hour, and we are broadcasting on Yagara and Turrbal country. And today on the show we are going to be celebrating the history of this fine radio station, because on Monday it will be 50 years of broadcasting on this frequency to which you are tuned, and what an amazing feat it is of longevity, of something that's been driven mostly by volunteers, that's been a thorn in the side of authorities at times, and that has always represented the community, not gone for the big bucks, but has managed to survive and be an integral part of Brisbane's community in general, but also that has always pointed the way towards an alternative, better world that is possible. And that is what I'm going to be talking about on the show today, because I've gathered interviews with a few voices of people who have done radical radio programs over the years on Triple Z, of which there have been many, but I just wanted to grab a few. And so we will hear over the course of the show today from Asger Strodl, Wave Beach and Linda Rose, who have all been making radical radio. Between these three, it does cover like the 90s, the 2000s and the 2010s up until, early 2020s. And so it's a fair amount of the station's history, and it's been just such a wonderful honour for myself to be a part of it as well. The station's tradition of making, independent, radical media that tries to both, hold accountable the powers in our society, but also help people to imagine better alternatives and tell those kind of stories. And so, I love 4ZZZ. And I'm glad that you're listening, and probably many of you listening are subscribers, and so you're a part of making this station happen as well. And of course, if you are not a subscriber, you can become that by getting onto the Triple Z website, sign up, pitch in some money, help it all happen, and feel a part of creating the kind of media that we want to see in the world. So I better get into it, because all the people I've interviewed have lots of good things to say about 4ZZZ, and so I'll try to cram them all in. Let's start with Asger.
Hi, my name's Asger Strodl, and I used to do the Anarchy Show on Triple Z a long time ago. I think it was between year 2000 to 2005.
What kind of things did you do on the Anarchy Show? What kind of radio were you making?
Primarily, I guess it was sort of news and views. We would sort of investigate or sort of research what sort of things were going around the world with anarchists. We'd sort of just discuss topics, present our opinion on things. Obviously we'd sort of play music in between our sort of talk breaks, but it was primarily a talk show. We'd talk a lot about sort of protest actions around Australia. So I guess I would say that news, information and opinion.
That era, it was a very active time for anarchists around the world. Particularly, I'm thinking of the kind of anti-globalization movement and these big summits, from Seattle to Melbourne to Genoa and things like that. Were you engaging with that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. On top of that, I was also engaged in Brisbane Indie Media. We were all about sort of how do we communicate information and ideas and get around the mainstream media, which was pretty suffocating and still is in the way it can control the narrative. So I was pretty active in all of that. It was an incredibly busy time, and I think historically there was a lot of radical action going on then. It'd actually be pretty interesting to sort of talk about a bit more. But I was on lots of blockades all over the place, as well as organising different sort of protests and other events at the same time. It was really busy. There was lots of other people engaged in all the other different sort of things. There was a huge sort of I guess a culture going on as well. You had the Reclaim the Streets parties going on all the time as well. If I remember right, there was a stage we had 2 different Food Not Bombs groups going on, one in West End and New Farm too. So it's a busy period in Brisbane's history.
And there was a zine that I have seen called 4ZZZ Radical Radio or something like that you were a part of putting together that zine, were you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Back then there was different shows like Eco Radio or the Environment Show at the time, which sort of shared philosophies, and we thought it would be good to sort of collaborate on content and cooperate a bit more to sort of coordinate our efforts and share information. So one of those was a zine we put out, and to be honest, I think I might still have a copy still somewhere under the house in a box, but I mean, if you listen, you might hear the little intro about Radical Radio on Eco Radio, and that comes from that time. Yeah,
it's interesting, I guess, that the world of communication has changed so much. You have these huge, like, tech platforms and media monopolies, that have just gathered more and more influence. But at that time, you had, making zines, indie media on the internet sort of seemed like this information frontier, and, community radio was a part of that too, like this kind of countercultural media ecosystem that was happening, hey?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's just more. Well, as far as I was concerned, it was just you do what you can do. You use the tools that are available to you, and if you don't have any tools, then you build some new ones. That was basically it. And so, the internet was fairly new then as well. The indie media concept was reasonably new, and if you know the history, came out of the globalization, anti-globalization blockades. It was just easy, I guess, to talk to people in one way. We can talk about how the internet sort of changed the way we communicate now, and I think possibly in a toxic way. But there was just a lot of face-to-face communication going on. You'd share information through your email if you aren't close to each other, and so there was a lot of community building through the process of sharing of the information, which I think is actually the most important bit. Is how do you build community and human connections, and how to coordinate activities like that. That's kind of the priority there, then, rather than just sharing news. It's the process of how people interact that sort of builds an alternative society, or a radical society, I think. Yeah.
Well, looking back, I'm interested if there were any memorable moments on air or as part of making radio that stick out as real highlights, or maybe even lowlights.
Tons of highlights, tons of lowlights. I think the way I even got onto the radio was probably the most interesting little journey. I went to UNE down in Armidale. I'd studied sociology and politics. I did a course in anarchism and Marxism. I was very interested in these ideas, and I was just happened to walk past Triple Z. And I'm not too sure how it happened, but I just started chatting to this guy who was outside the car park, Triple Z. His name was Dave Kimball. he'd also just moved up from Armidale. He'd had the same ideas as me, but he had done a community radio station down there in Armidale, and he was like, "Oh, look, I'm here. I want to go chat to the people who are running the Anarchy show at the moment. Do you want to come along with me?" And I was like, yep, sounds cool. I'll come in. We walked in and we sat around on the Anarchy show with the two other presenters. And they sort of said, "Hey, look, do you two guys want to help produce the show?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, why not? Sounds interesting." Dave Kimball went, "Yeah, look, I used to do a radio show. I'll jump on this." And so we turned up the next week, and they didn't. So we sat around the studio for about 5 or 10 minutes going, what the hell are we doing? There was a fair bit of dead air, to be honest. Completely unprofessional, but yeah, they just didn't turn up. And so we ran upstairs, got one of the other guys, Alex Gillies, to come down and do the paddling while we just ranted. And from there on in, we just kept doing the show. So I actually never planned to do a radio show on Triple Z. It's just one of those happy accidents I got dragged into, and I'm very glad for it, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. We're a bit more organised than that now at 4ZZZ, I promise.
Yeah, I've heard rumours. But, I guess the organic chaos was always fun way back then.
What about any on-air highlights, like favourite shows or anything like that?
On-air highlights? I had Peter the Pest on one time. I didn't know who he was, and he was just ranting that crazy stuff. It got a bit embarrassing, to be honest. I don't know if people know Peter the Pest as a historical icon, but that was an interesting show. He got a bit wild. It was interesting how people would recognise my voice, to be honest. I had a couple of instances where I'd just be running around the city doing my own thing. I'd run into someone and they'd go, "Oh, I recognise you. You do the Anarchy show." And probably one of my favourites was way back then, the Aussie Nash used to be a punk venue, and there was a John Howard election night. There was a big punk gig put on there to celebrate or watch the election night. And yeah, I was up the road. I lived up the road. We probably had a few drinks beforehand. I was probably a little bit messy. Walked in and the bouncer was like, "Oh, how are you, mate?" And I had him a little rant. And he went, "Oh, I recognise you. You're the guy from the Anarchy show. Come on in. I'll look after you." And so that was, I'd say pretty memorable. So it was also demonstrated that people were listening, and what we're saying was getting through and having an impact, which is pretty validating for your own efforts. It's a good feeling.
All right, well, Asger, I wonder if you have any songs that you think of as particularly symbolic of your era at Triple Z that you would want to request.
Look, it'd have to be Insurge. There was the whole Power of the Poison People sort of album. The cover of the Kev Carmody song,
Images of London.
Yeah, that one. I'd love to hear that again. That's brilliant.
Oh, true. A cover of a Brisbane legend. What is it about Insurge, I think, that symbolises that era for you?
Oh, industrial, really. They were just hard industrial music. So they were very explicit in their lyrics, and they just had a lot of energy and focus, and were pretty famous, I guess, for an outright anarchist band. Yeah, at the time they were just big. I guess we could also talk about Mutiny, and just the whole folk punk genre was pretty dominant back then too. Hey, and good fun.
Yeah, it fitted with the travelling anarchist kind of summit sort of philosophy as well.
This is true. We had a lot of protest tourists who just spent their time traveling around the country, going from blockade to blockade, which I actually fully respect. That this became the job and the lifestyle, just the resistance to the system, and then through that travel, obviously people just built their own communities and networks, and shared information as well as, like I said, the organic building of community networks is what's important, and how we use that to share information, I think, is part of the revolutionary struggle there.
All right, well, thanks, Asger. And on Monday, Triple Z will turn 50, which is pretty amazing, and you are a part of that history. I guess, do you have any last reflections on 50 years of community radio in Brisbane?
Look, I think Brisbane is its own unique city. It's got its own unique culture, and there's so much that's gone on here, which has actually been radical and revolutionary, and a lot of that history doesn't get taught. I think it's pretty important that we retain our oral histories, and Triple Z is a central institution for maintaining that sort of that knowledge and tradition. It's telling that the station has lasted this long, that it hasn't fallen due to various internal conflicts, and that it's a valuable feature of the city.
Yes, you are listening to 4ZZZ, and we are celebrating 50 years of making community radio. Kev Carmody, who of course is an absolute legend of Brisbane music, and Kev Carmody's first ever recordings were in the 4ZZZ studio. He would come in on air on the Murray radio show, and with his guitar and play some songs, and they would record the tapes and send them around to other community radio stations around the country, particularly ones that had Aboriginal shows, and they would play his music long before he had any records released or anything like that, which is another fantastic bit of Triple Z history. And of course we still do live broadcasts of musicians, local musicians as well. Yes, we are talking about some of the history of radical radio on this station. I better keep it cracking because there's lots to say about that history. So let's hear from Wave Beach.
Hi there, my name's Wave. These days, in the 90s, I was one of the David B.
Yes, you have a long involvement with 4ZZZ Wave, and today we're talking about some of the people that have been making radical radio over the years. Can you tell us what has been your involvement with Triple Z, in particular with sort of activist radio at the station?
Well, I came in to the Triple Z studios in the valley there. They were freshly, I'm not sure exactly how freshly into the building, but it was still in the temporary studio down against Barry Parade with the street noise bleeding straight on through, and I came in to be interviewed about an upcoming rally for Men Against Sexual Assault, where I was working together with Ben Pennings at the time there too on that in that group, in that campaign. Damien Lagulagon was doing the show, and the next week I was doing the Peace and Environment show, and from then on for a bit of a while. As happened in the day, those days it wasn't even the panel that you saw at the exhibition. That was basically a PA desk, just with all the pots, etc. And and it was a 3-hour show at that time, like the news shows as well, where you were playing a good few songs and then various external articles. Yeah, I was also replaying stuff that came in on cassettes from the what's now on ComradeSat on the satellite, from shows like the Stick Together show and other environmental shows from Melbourne mainly. And then through there, I evolved into doing breakfast shows and other shows, and eventually someone said, "Hey, who are you?" Did some proper training, etc. But of course, often it's the case that some of the most heart and soul types slip in through the back door quickly, like your fine self as well.
Yes, that's right.
But it's sometimes clear who are in the who are in the right place and doing it for those reasons, which is where then in the end I think Linda came around to giving it this label of radical radio, which it hadn't been before. But I was looking at some of the old radio times. There was always a bit of a conjecture between what was termed as community news and that which is the journalistic-y proper news. So I think maybe the community news maybe comes into this radical radio thing, where it's basically people from the community, whether they've got a political agenda or just they're trying to stop a development in their area, just basically having their say. It's not about some journalistic notion of the journalist must try and find a balanced opinion from all sides of things. We just are the served. Triple Z just serves, and I think this is still a legitimate view from many in the community, that it serves an alternative view. The other views are represented already across in the mainstream and, don't need us to give them any extra airtime.
Yeah, for sure. Representing marginalised voices. That's right. There's plenty of voices for the corporate and governmental powers that be.
Yeah. And just to that time when I was arrived and listening to all the history that's going on, it's most fascinating. I love it, hearing lots of those great 80s songs, and some of those still bled over to the early 90s time. And I loved having people of who had continued through, David Lennon being one of them, who we've heard as well from. But there's controversy around some of those times when, kicked off the university, and some dodgy operating principles perhaps before it got to its, found its feet again. But I'd just like to make the analogy of like any growing up child, any human. Triple Z is a life to itself, and at approximately 13, young, it was booted out of home, had to go and survive on the streets of Toowong, as it were, maybe funding itself and experimenting with other substances, which continued, through into the valley a bit. The other people running the news show at the time were some fine characters, but, they're fraughtness as we all have our scuff to deal with or whatever. But, then in the run, I'd say you'd probably laid at the feet even of market days, where that community of people that were volunteering there at the time, whoever is there, brought that real community union together. Running that festival was a big part of it. It got a bit too much eventually for us in the end, but there was a real strong vibe through that mid-90s time of togetherness while the collective was still operating and functioning, and things were moving along. And eventually someone started to be paid again, and that first person who was put on a payroll, other than the promotions person, always got their percentage, but this was a cleaner to keep us all tidy. So we started at the bottom with where someone was paid.
Yeah, right. I wonder, are there any sort of memorable on-air highlights from your time at Triple Z that you think of looking back?
Well, I can't really go past, I'm not sure what year it was, but when the Dirty Three first came to town, with this the kind of enthusiasm that Paul Cadis has for bands that he really loves, and this was no exception. I think they'd only had their first release, and there I'm on air and hear these three dudes turn up and set up opposite where you're sitting in the studio, well, Studio 1 as it was, and there they were playing in front of me. Damn it, I didn't chuck a tape in the cassette player to record it. But Warren Ellis just like leaning over the panel there and going nuts, as he really did in that day, mid-90s sometime, I don't know. No, you don't forget that.
Yeah, wow.
There wasn't so much political action going on during that period. We were in that safe Labor period, that had, the Libs had been kicked out, LNP, and, so things, we were able to just, not butt up against things really in that way. Music, though. Yes, it's for sure. All those market days, doing the butt pick on the day. Sundays was a great part of it. Just, where the real true believers came together and cleaned up after that big day. Got their rewards.
Yeah. You went away for a while. You down doing some blockading and living in South Australia for a while, and then you came back in the 2010s to be involved at Triple Z. Had you noticed, had things changed, or were there things that had stayed the same?
I don't know. I felt like music hadn't gone really anywhere since the 90s, basically. Bands keep making band sounds, and that's all very fantastic. Hip-hop, though, was, where real consciousness was, as far as especially Aboriginal hip-hop. I was tears of joy as I heard Christy bringing Murray Radio back to Triple Z airwaves with Indigibriz, as it then has continued even stronger on since then. I feel really blessed to have heard some of that era as well, and have the culture of Aboriginal music, just inculcated into my being. It's such a blessing, the stories that are in that, and that we get to hear more and more again now, as the kids get to grow up with a little bit less shit on them and a more freedom of expression that is available there for them to come through. And so it's great work in Triple Z allowing for that, as it did also when I got back. One of the coordinators, Nikki, did a little campaign of getting younger people back in. It was getting a little bit older farts on air, and that kind of brought a bit of a resurgence of energy in the mid-teens or thereabouts. Something I'm not really certain the year. And I felt, and then you started to hear the announcers listening to each other. Someone would play something, and other people would pick it up and take it on again. Because when we'd gone to 2 studios, there was a bit of a period of disconnect because you didn't know the person, didn't get to meet and have a little chat with the person on the air after you and before you. But that's, all these things have come around over time. And just to go back to the early 90s, that happened again there where, a new cohort of younger people came in and were running the radio, and nothing better than watching some young person fresh out of school take on some job of, music or whichever one. I did music coordinator myself for a year back there. And, seeing them just grow into those positions, it's just such an immensely satisfying thing to behold, let alone like you hear it on air. Long-term listeners will hear, there's some young person starting on the radio, and you hear just their musical tastes evolve, the way they talk and what they talk about and what they've come to learn about the world. It's a wonderful thing, and really part of that whole family nature of the place that holds it so dear to many of us.
All right, well, it is 4ZZ's 50th birthday on Monday. Do you have any reflections about this institution and your own role in it?
Oh, I mean, one of squadillions doing their little bits, many who have, had their little luminous moments of doing something. My little bit, one little bit I can think of was, even just being music coordinator for that year and letting the rock and roll band music look after itself. And I went looking for world music and contemporary composed music and whatever, any other variety, just to get the variety in there so that there was that variety of music for people to play, jazz, contemporary jazz. So that was a lot of fun, going down south and visiting the other stations and seeing how they'd all had their issues over their own years as well, bringing in managers. We didn't have any managers yet, and of course that had its little poor experiment with our first one. So back in about 2000 odd. So it's a lovely thing that now managers are all been promoted from within basically the Triple Z ranks. It's a wonderful that's able to happen. Oh, and together with Linda, when I was around in 2000 as well, I was living nearby and popped into town, and we updated Peace Environment Show to Eco Radio as a name. But it's been really gratifying that the current kids, Dave, etc., have brought back in that Peace Environment Show notion of it as well, because it is, there's such strong history of that. There was a nuclear disarmament show, I remember, in the early days too, I remember. But anyone who knows the early days of environment radio, send the story in. Send all your stories in. We've all got so many stories, yes. Keep listening. Thanks, Jim, yesterday. Oh, so wonderful hearing the old Jim, to have met Jim. Jim and John Baird's shouting matches across the station. Oh, it was something to behold, that's for sure. The wonderful people they are. Passionate and driven.
All right. Thanks very much, Wave.
All right, no worries. Good on you, Andy.
You are listening to 4ZZZ. We were just speaking with Wave Beach today on the show. We're looking back at 50 years of radical radio on this station and talking to Wave about his time there in the 90s and then again in the 2010s. And I've got one more interview, which is with Linda Rose, whose time spanned a couple of decades of Triple Z's illustrious history, as we shall hear from her. And so let's have a listen to Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Rose. I started at 4ZZZ in 1999, and I pretty much regularly did news and current affairs show until 2020.
That's a very long stint, and it was in a few different sort of incarnations. Can you tell us a bit about what kind of things you got up to while at Triple Z?
Okay, so when I was at Triple Z, I think I was lucky enough to start when John Baird was in the newsroom. And Heather Anderson, too, were two people. And I also met lots of other people who were really active and activists, like Paul Kempis and Bernadette, who were going out onto the street doing things. So that was really good for me because I met lots of people in the Brisbane activist scene, and I got to experience the kind of thing of going out and getting involved with the activist groups.
I guess these days things have changed so much with social media and things like that, but at that time, was 4ZZZ a sort of more integral part of the Brisbane activist subculture?
I guess yes, but I think although there's now there's so many different ways to get the information out there. But I think 4ZZZ still has a very important part to play in that, because ZZZ is the media, the alternative media, and even though there is Facebook and all of that, we really need to keep getting people out there reporting on things and being involved with activism and organisation.
How did you first get involved at ZZZ?
And I went in working with John Baird on Brisbane and Beyond, which was on Tuesday afternoons. So that was basically a news program like Brisbane Line, Brisbane and Beyond on Tuesday and Thursday afternoon between 12 and 3, and Brisbane Line was on Saturday, I think, between 12 and 3. I actually said, why don't we cut it back to just one hour?
It's interesting, I guess, the tension at a organisation like ZZZ between the people who are there just for the music and the people who think it should have a sort of radical and news element that I guess part of those conversations about 3 hours of people talking about local current affairs or 1 hour. It's part of this broader idea of a community trying to work things out together.
So back then there was a lot more music played during the news, and the news, it was sort of more blended with the music, and at the time also, so people used to do news packages on cassette tape, and then there'd be a place in the station where the cassette tapes would be taken with a intro, and any announcer could go and play the news.
Yeah,
so
right.
It was sort of more integrated into that. So yeah, it was a different time. Things like trips notices still happened, and accommodation notices, which I believe is back. It wasn't like this 1 hour news. It was sort of it's just part of the programming with the music. Yeah, I did the Anarchy show for a very long time. So, and you with the paradigm shift too. 3 hours is a long time.
It is possible to have too much of a good thing.
Yes, that's right. So,
all right, well, I'm interested in hearing, over your long involvement making radical radio at ZZZ, were there any sort of highlights, on-air highlights that stand out in your mind?
Okay, so I have a list here of everything, of the main things things I went to. So my first big activist event was the World Economic Forum in Melbourne. So that was pretty big, and I used to ring into Alex Oliver's show actually when I was in Melbourne and do some crossovers. So yeah, there's a sense of there was music programs that were doing news. We went to Sydney to the World Economic Forum. I went to Canberra for the 40th anniversary of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. I went out to Roxby Downs and Olympic Dams uranium mine and interviewed Uncle Kevin Buzzacott, with Franklin Lopez, the Puerto Rican filmmaker. Lake Cowell, I don't know even if you would know about Lake Cowell.
I grew up out near there, Linda.
Oh, okay.
Although I wasn't there. Yeah. It is before my time, but I do know of it.
Yeah. Like what was Lake Cowell, which is now a gold mine. So, yeah, we had the gully. One of the most important things I think I was involved with was Jandy Rainbow and John Frame were agitating for trans people to be included in the Anti-Discrimination Act in Queensland. So up until 2000, trans people were not included in the Anti-Discrimination Act. Yeah, I tried to do my bit with that as well. And, it's so great now that Triple Z has, transmission programming about trans people. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, you're like a on-the-beat reporter at all these different big protest gatherings.
Yeah, Pine Gap too, and the food irradiation plant at Narangba. Kim Stewart and I used to go up there all the time. There was a protest camp there, and we used to do the crossovers and reporting from up there. Something else in more recent times too is the offshore refugee policy of started with Labor and then the Liberal government. So I interviewed some of the men on Manus Island and on Nauru, also the women. I was really involved with what was going on. Like, I was there when the riot, I wasn't there obviously, but I was on the Telegram channel and listening to everything when the riot happened, when Reza Barati was killed. I met men there who I then met in Brisbane. And that was pretty amazing to have, interviewed people who were in this dire situation, thousands and thousands of kilometres away from Brisbane, and then met them here. I interviewed Beiruz Buchani, before he was sort of, fairly well known. I interviewed him. My partner grew up with him, is a really close friend of his. That's pretty amazing. I met, someone a few months ago in Maruka near the Afghan shops, and it's I know you, and I interviewed him. He was on Nauru, and then I met him in Brisbane.
Well, Linda, you've picked Combat Wombat as a band that represents Triple Z in your era. Do you want to tell us about why you picked that?
Okay, so I talked about the food irradiation plant up here in Narangba. It was 2002 was the era, and Izzy and Mark came up to Brisbane. They were staying they were staying in Brisbane a bit and up at Narangba, and they actually helped out. We did Eco Radio together for about 6 months. So, aside from all their songs are just so pertinent to everything happening in the world, it's also, really special to me, that time when we were working together. Yeah, so many good bands out there, and it really shows there is a connection between music and news. They're not two separate things.
Yeah. All right, well, Linda, on Monday it is Triple Z's 50th birthday, I guess, and you have been there for a big stretch of that. Do you have any sort of reflections on 50 years of community radio in Brisbane?
There's been so many people involved for Triple Z, and it's great. It's still coming, it's still going, and I think the way forward is being inclusive. Especially with the disabilities. Kim Stewart did a great thing with starting Ability Radio, and that's the way we can move forward and try and get a diversity of people to be involved in the station. And also on the 27th of December, we're doing a party at Ibis Island in Barrambin, Victoria Park, because it's an absolute travesty that they're even trying to put this stadium in this hilly inner city park, which is significant to the local Indigenous people. And Jane Greig's been helping me out a lot. She's, like a voice from the 80s. I think I'm very lucky that I span my time at Triple Z did include people like from the beginning as well.
All right. Thanks, Linda. Linda Rose, we were just talking to about her time making radical radio here at 4ZZZ, and it's so valuable having this station and other places like it, independent media, not corporate controlled and not algorithm controlled as well. It's about people getting together, making community, and the art that we make when we do it. And of course, we've had a lot of fun looking at the past in recent times on 4ZZZ, and it is a past worth celebrating, but also it's about the future as well, this station, and we'll keep on going, keep on broadcasting with your help, and not just that, but we'll keep on imagining what our future could look like and better ways of doing it and learning from each other, and bringing some of the voices that aren't heard by the mainstream. And so here's to another 50 years of 4ZZZ. I'll see you next week.